Hello and welcome to the Mal and Johnny Show. Now, in chatting to Johnny this week, we started thinking about people who've been influential in our lives and also in our careers. And it's always nice to say thank you, isn't it? Because nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. Johnny, your idea, who are you thinking of when you first came up with this idea for this week's podcast?
Well, there are a number of people through my life that have actually influenced me. I mean, my father, obviously, and my mother, because they were in show business. But other than that, when I was a kid, being brought up in my stag, I had a school teacher called Cynnoedd Jenkins. Right?
Wow, what a great name.
And he was the history teacher. I think in retrospect, I think he must have been a guardsman at one time. He had the shoes polished to death, and he was a big, tall man. He used to stride through with his walking stick, Anyway, he used to bring history alive when he used to talk about it. He'd talk about the Silures and the Ordovishis, the old tribes of Wales, and I can still remember it. So I think things like that stick with you all your life, don't they?
Yeah, and did it make you feel special? Because I know a couple of teachers didn't make you feel terribly special. You remember those as well a little bit, don't you?
Oh, yeah. The maths teacher, I won't mention him, but he was a pain. He used to hit everybody with his cane. He used to call people names. He used to call one kid Donkey because he wasn't too bright, but that wasn't very kind. And he used to call me Nine Pints because the old man had a pub. I mean, he's one of those.
Isn't it funny that, I mean, without being, ageist, that's like 70 years ago, and you're remembering those exact words. It's amazing when people speak to you and speak into you.
Yeah,
you never forget, do you?
Well, no, I probably told you this story before, but the headmaster in the junior school, I was always bad in school because I think I must have had ADHD or something, so I couldn't concentrate. I learned more since leaving school than ever before. And I won a swimming gala. So we're all in the hall now, ready for the assembly, and he's handing out the certificates. And he said, "John Griffiths, that's my full name, John Tudor Griffiths. You won and he gives me my certificate, and he says to everybody, 'See, even John Griffiths can do something.'" I mean, it would have scarred me if I'd have been,
Yeah.
But Cynnoedd was great, and as I say, he used to bring it to life. But then there was another man. When I went to work first, I went to work in a shop. See, before I went into show business, I used to work in a man's shop selling clothes. I started off in John Collier's in Cardiff, but then when my father moved to Port Talbot, he was running a casino. I went to work for Hodges Menswear. See, and the manager was a guy called Tom Alsop. Now, this guy, he was a character. You couldn't make him up. The first day I turned up for work, he stood there in his overcoat and his hat. And he's counting money with his gloves on. See? Because it was cold, right? He said, "Mr. Griffiths?" I said, yeah, I've been waiting for you. He said, "Let me show you. Now, this is the fancy department here. No, that's your responsibility. I don't want to see it again." Right? He said, "And over there, you'll see an overall and some gloves and a hat. Go downstairs, you will find a furnace. And you will start the furnace to start the central heating." I thought, what's going on here? I'm supposed to sell clothes, He said, he was so pedantic. He said, "You start," he said, "with some paper, some sticks, 2 lumps of steam coal, no more or less. And when it's going, you put on the anthracite." I thought, this is daft. Anyway, but I got to like this man. He was something else. He taught me to think positive.
Yeah.
For instance, it's Christmas Eve, and the place was ransacked. All the stock had gone nearly. It was 10 minutes to 6 on Christmas Eve. We're about to go home. And this guy walks in. He says, "Got any ties?" And we had about 6 left. I said, "Well, we've got 6 ties left. Is there any good? Take your pick." "Tom, Mr. Griffiths, what do you mean we have 6? We have 6 attractive ties. Which one do you want? Negativity will get you nowhere." And he's right. Yeah. Never be negative. There's no point.
Exactly.
But he was a tyrant, but I liked him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, he's a tyrant.
We became big pals, And I'd go and see him after I went into showbiz. I'd call back and see him in the shop. "Put the kettle on, Mr. Griffiths, we'll have a cup of tea." Oh. And he was like, he was great. He was like, I'm trying to think if there's anybody like him. He was a haberdasher,
Oh.
A bit like the guy. Yeah, what was the guy that was in
Grace Brothers? Was it?
But Dad's Army.
Oh.
Low. Somebody.
I thought what?
Arthur Lowe. Yeah, he was a bit like him. But he was in the end. I loved him. He was a great guy,
Yeah.
And then I think, who else was there? Well, people that I never met, like Richard Burton, inspired me.
Right.
I used to love to listen to Under Milk Wood. The voice used to get to me, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'd go on the ship. I'd take Under Milk with me on my headphones on when I wasn't working, I'd be up on deck with the headphones listening to Under Milkwood, you know.
Wow.
And of course, he was from Port Albert, so there was that connection, you know.
Yeah. I'm thinking
What about you?
Yeah. So I'm thinking in school, now there was a chap called Peter Williams, or
Right.
I always refer to him as Peter Bongo Williams.
Right.
So he was in charge of a class, but given the role of setting up the school band, right? So
Yes.
he used to play, and I can still remember it now. He used to play a lovely, lovely big guitar, and he never had a plectrum, so he would take his cigarette packets and cut them up and use the cardboard for playing.
Right.
But he introduced me to all these sort of folk songs like John Riley, Streets of London. What was the bit hit by Thin Lizzy? I went walking on the Berry Mountain. I tell you, Daddy, Whiskey in the Jarro. Sorry, got there eventually.
Whiskey in the
Taught me all
Jarro,
those songs, and we had a couple of girl singers, and then there was Michael Edwards used to play the bongos as well because they were Mr. Peter Bongo Williams's bongos.
Yeah.
And we used to meet sort of most lunchtimes to have a band practice. And he gave me my first sort of break. You know, he knew I was writing songs, so he put me on the stage. You know, he said, right, Edwin, you're going to sing your songs now to the whole of the school. I must have been 9 or 10 years old, you know.
Yeah.
But he had that confidence in me to actually go out. And I, you know, I suppose you need your first break, don't you? You need someone to say you can do this.
Well, that's right. Well, it's like thinking of now you've reminded me, my first dancing teacher, a lady called Kitty Slocum, she was very famous in Cardiff, and she taught lots of people, made it quite big, like Irving Davis, who became a huge choreographer in London. He used to do all the Cilla Black shows and so on. And she was my mother's teacher, and she was a big influence. She came up the pub one day, and I'd seen somebody on TV. I think it was Sammy Davis or something. I want to dance like that. She said, "Come down." She said, "I'll teach you." And she did. And the very first show I ever did, I was about 14, I think. And I wore my father's dress suit. It must have been small because it was like it was a tail suit, right?
Right.
And it was at the Memorial Hall in Barry. Right. And she taught me this step, and I tapped right across the stage, tapped on, and then tapped off the other side. That was it. Wow. But I was doing pieces. I was thinking, I was so nervous I'm going on stage, you know. Yeah. But that was the first time I ever went on a stage. Yeah.
Then I suppose in your professional career, somebody like Dorothy Squires, you know, to give you those breaks to play the London Palladium and stuff like that. That, you know, it shows that someone who knows what they're talking about has the confidence in putting you in that position. Well,
I remember I was telling my old man on that night we did the Palladium, 1971, I think it was, and my father was there, and he said, "Thanks for doing this, Dot." He said, "You know, I really appreciate it." So she said, "Well, I did it for you, Bert, for what you did for me when I was starting," she said. "But I tell you something, I wouldn't have done it if you was no bloody good." I thought that was at least he was honest, you know.
Honest to the nth degree. Stan Stennett must have been good for you as well.
Stan was a big influence on me with the pantomimes. I mean, you learned so much from just watching Stan, the way he could go on a stage and command the children. I mean, it was like magic. He'd walk on, they didn't know who he was. He'd go, make a few funny noises, play a guitar chord and go, "Hello, kids." And they go, "Hello, Billy." And then you come as one. "You're in my gang now, boys. Okay, everything I do, you got to do it. You know." And he just got him in the palm of his hand. And the way he'd walk on, as soon as you introduced him, you know, his music would start, da, 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 and he'd walk across the stage and he wouldn't look at the audience. And then just as he got middle of the stage, he'd go, and they'd come up and, you know, it was just his timing was so good, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, I did so many pantos with Stan. It was crazy.
Yeah. Okay, so in my professional career, I suppose John Peel and his producer, you know, writing to my dad, having that, you know, saying we think he's good enough to be on the radio. I mean, that was astounding. Steve Brown, a guy called Steve Brown, who actually was Elton John's mentor. He's the guy who got him to stop writing Eurovision songs and start writing songs that would become Elton John songs, you know, produced his first album. And he came to Swansea and signed me and was always a big supporter. I remember he wrote to the record company once. He'd sort of split from the record company and I'd done some demos with Elton John. And they were umming and ahhing about what to do next. And he wrote a letter to the then new boss of Rocket Records and said, "If you don't record and put this record out, the big pop star in the sky will make your ears drop off." So that was something like that. Gus Dudgeon, who produced Elton and David Bowie. I remember being in a limousine going back to his house, having done a session, him saying, God, I just wish I was you. I'm thinking, this man's got all these gold records, you know.
Yeah. What about arrangers? Did you work with any good arrangers?
Arrangers. No, God, let me just think now then. Because it was a bit different in those. Because what happened for me is that it was the other way around. I know that you would have the full Monty, wouldn't you, when you did record?
Yeah. I didn't write anything. I was just the singer, and the arranger would come in, the new song, and he'd arrange it with a 36-piece orchestra. Well, and it was amazing. And in those days, you recorded with the band. Wow. You were in a box.
Yes.
To isolate you. But now, of course, it's done in bits, as you know.
Yeah.
And it was fun. And funny enough, Sinatra, even to the end, wouldn't work only that way. You had to work with the orchestra because you get the feel of the orchestra.
Yeah.
And I remember this book was called Arthur Greenslade. Okay. Right. Now, Arthur Greenslade used to be Engelbert Humperdinck's conductor and Shirley Bassey's. Okay. So this song I sang from Gibraltar, the B-side was like a jazz waltz, a bit like the last waltz. See? So when it finished, you went, "Oh, it's just like Enge." He told me a great story about Enge. He said the thing is with Enge. He said the thing with Enge. He said he was doing this one record. I don't know which one it was, and he couldn't get one part of it. He was throwing him. He couldn't do it. In the end, he said we had all equipment in Great Yarmouth where he was doing the summer season. We're in his house trying to record this bit which he couldn't get. So in the end, Gordon Mills rang up Tom Jones. He said, "Get up here," he said. So Jonesy came up. He said, "Sing that." And he did it like that. He said, "I want it like that." So no wonder they don't get off. Can you imagine?
That's a great story.
Because Tom Jones is a natural, isn't he? He can sing anything.
Yeah, he doesn't think about it. He just does it.
Just does it. Yeah.
So when I used to record, I'd go up there for my school holidays, and then I'd play it on a guitar. And maybe we'd have a couple of like a bass player or the very first recordings playing a guitar. Then I'd go back, and then a couple of weeks later, they'd send me the track with an orchestra on. Sometimes they'd start with a string quartet because they didn't want to spend too much money. Then they think, oh well, sounds all right. Let's put a full orchestra on it. So the track used to grow as the weeks went past, and I wasn't a part of it. I did Eurovision live with Ronnie Hazelhurst.
I worked with him once. Yeah, he came to Wales.
Did he?
He came to Wales. He used to do the Margaret Williams show from HTV, and I did one of Margaret's programs. Ronnie Hazelhurst.
Well, he knew his notes and everything.
Good, yeah.
That is a wonderful experience singing with an orchestra. I don't think there's anything
nothing like it, is there? Nothing like it.
Arrangers. There was a guy called Richard Hewson who did because the thing is, when I was doing stuff with this guy Gus Dudgeon, Elton was in a sort of like an in-between time. He was thinking of losing one band and changing to some other musicians. And Gus was the biggest producer in the world at the time. So he could get anybody to do work, because if they did a good job on my tracks, they might get a chance to do Elton's.
Yeah.
A guy called Richard Hewson who did a couple of tracks on the Let It Be album with the Beatles. And he did these wonderful, string and brass arrangements for about 4 or 5 songs, which have never been released. They've never seen the light of day.
It's amazing. Isn't it? I got like the 24 track or 32 track stuff in my cellar like this. I mean, you can't use them now. I mean, but they're there,
You have to find
I remember working with a bloke called Bill Shepherd, who used to be the arranger for the Bee Gees.
Wow.
And anyway, we did it in sections, like you just saying, because we were in this small studio in Denmark Street. It was for Southern Music Publishers, and they had their own little studio downstairs. So you could only get so many people in there. So they do the rhythm section first. Yeah. Then they'd bring in the girl singers. Then they'd bring in the brass. Then they bring in, and they did about 5 or 6 different, and then just put it all together. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Bill Shepherd, I'll never forget that.
Larry Page, Larry.
Larry Page, the Teenage Rage.
Because once you get a reputation, you get a couple of hits. We want the new sound. So this guy, I wonder if it's the same guy. He'd done some arrangements for the Bee Gees, and Larry said, "Right, I want him for my next, hit record." And of course, so he gives him the song, and he does the arrangement. They come to the session, and they play the track, and the orchestra's all there. Nothing happens for like 2-3 minutes. It's only a 3.5 minute song, and he's only done a string arrangement for the last minute and a half of the track. And Larry's going, "I'm paying him a lot of money. I want more notes." So scribble out some more. Even though the arranger thought it didn't need those extra bits.
It's exactly like Casno when I did the record. He brought in the guy that did all the Love Affair hits. What's his name? Anyway, he brought him in to do the arrangement. And he says, "I want a great arrangement for John." I don't care what you spend, but I don't glockenspiel. One note, 15 quid. Because it used to be 15 quid a session back in the 60s.
I knew a saxophone player who made his whole career on 3 bars. I think it was for Bolero with you really play the saxophone in the middle. You sit there all the way through all night and just play.
Do you remember Peter Starstead?
Oh,
Where'd you go to my lovely?
Yeah, I love those.
Well, I always liked that song, right? Now, and I worked with him in South Africa. Oh. We were on the same bill in South Africa, and he liked me, and he said, "I'm going to write you a song, John," he said. Right. So he wrote me a song all about Rumney Valley. It's quite good, actually. I got it on somewhere. Anyhow, I asked him, I said, when you did Where'd You Go to My Lovely? I've been wanted to know this. If you listen to it, it's just guitar all the way through. All of a sudden, the strings come in for the last chorus, don't they? Just the last chorus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cost a fortune. There we are. I suppose it makes the difference. One last person then for me to mention, a guy called Michael Bogdanoff.
Oh,
Michael Bogdanoff. Now, Michael...
The director
had quite a reputation for being, a number of times he said, "I'm never working with that man again." But he was brilliant. He'd won Olivier Awards. He'd worked with all the big stars. Helen Mirren used to babysit his kids, and they were big mates in that sort of London New Shakespeare stuff. Yeah. But when I had this idea for a musical about the Welsh Revival, I went to the Grand Theatre, and the manager of the Grand Theatre, Gary Hart, said, "You should see Michael Bogdanoff because he's like almost like the resident director here for creating new work." And I was I was a bit terrified of Michael because of his reputation. But I went to see him, and he was great. Yeah. And he said, "So when do you want to do it?" I said, "Well, it's the centenary of the revival's 2004." He said, "No, it can't be done. How about 2005? And from that moment when he said, "We're going to do this in 2005, I suddenly thought, this man believes I can write a musical.
That's right.
And it was wonderful. And he encouraged me to write another musical about the boxer Tommy Farr. And in fact, just before he passed away, I was in London talking to him and a guy called Guy Masterson about a new musical about Richard Burton.
Oh, right, yeah.
So he still had, when people have faith in you, when they because he was totally confident in his own ability. He never doubted his own ability because he had a track record and the trophies to prove it. So he didn't have to make himself big to make other people look, small.
No, that's right.
He would build up the writer to be the most important, without the words on the page or the music on the stage.
Yeah. Didn't he pass lately? Didn't he die?
Yeah, it was a year or so ago. And typical of Michael, he was in Greece. He just spent the evening with his family. He had a glass of red wine and he just sort of slipped away with. And if he could have directed his passing,
that would have been it.
That's what he would have done. So.
Do you remember David Howell, the actor, DH?
DH. Saw him the other day. Yes, he's still going strong.
Well, DH got a company called What a Take, okay? So he rings me up. Alwyn rang. I was on a ship somewhere in China, and she rings and said, DH wants you to direct his pantomime. See? So he said, okay, I'll be home. And when I came back, so I did. I directed 3 of his pantomimes, and it was shown on S4C. But the funny thing, he said, I want a musical now, John. This is what reminded me of what you just said. So what kind of musical? Anything, as long as it's Welsh. So I said, what about... what about William Price? I said, he was a character. Oh, yeah, doing about William Price. I said, when do you want it by? He said, well, I booked all the theatres. I said, what? I said, we had to write a musical, Alwyn and I, with about 12 songs in English and Welsh, because he was going to do it both languages. And we did it. Don't ask us how we did it. But we did it.
Well, he knew you could do it. That's the good thing. He had faith. He had faith in you and Alwyn.
Character.
Yeah. And I suppose it's incumbent on us to encourage the next generation, isn't it?
That's right. But where are they going to go? See, it worries me about, you see these kids starting now, and I don't know where they're going to go. I mean, actors, I suppose, but they're good. Most of the actors are at work, unfortunately. But, I mean, you take performers as such. I mean, where are they going to work? They win something on TV, and they do a tour, and that's it. Yeah. There's no, unless they get into a musical, there's no clubs like we had. The nightclub circuit, all the cabaret circuits are all gone. The varieties, I mean, I don't know where they work. It's a funny business. It's totally changed. But as Wyn Calvin told us, we were blessed.
We were blessed. There we are.
I remember he told me, talking about influence, when I was working in John Collier's, he came in, right? And I was 16, and then he came to buy some clothes. He said, John, if you're going into show business, I'll probably follow the old man. He said, well, it's great you're working in a clothes shop. It shows you how to look after your props. I never forgot that either.
There we are. Another good influence on your career. All right, look, we're lovely to speak to you.
And you.
Enjoy the lovely weather, and I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week. We'll think of something else to talk about.
It's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from you. Ta-da.
Ta-da. Bye-bye.